Dames en heren, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Social Hub Amsterdam City. My name is Charlie MacGregor. I'm your host this evening, and I'm really excited about tonight. Before I introduce our special guest, maybe it's nice just to explain to you, to the people watching online, and for those of you who have just picked up the very special book in your hotel room and scanned the QR code, why we are here tonight and why this guest is very special to me and to the Social Hub. I've been doing this business for 15 years, and the Social Hub is all about bringing different people together under one roof. We bring students together with hotel customers. We bring co-workers, which are the local businesses and startups, together with the locals. And we bring everybody together under one roof. And when I started 15 years ago, everybody told me, never, ever do this. Don't bring a student and a hotel customer together through the same door. Don't bring them into the same lobby together. They honestly told me 15 years ago, hell would break out. God forbid a hotel customer was busy with a student, or a local guest, a local neighbor, meeting one of your hotel customers or your business travelers. I'm very pleased to say that we didn't listen to those people. We trusted our heart. And for me and for us at the Social Hub, it was so obvious that people are good. When you give away trust to people, when you allow them to be in the same environment, when you design a space to stimulate good behavior, magic happens. And I've seen this firsthand in the Social Hub. I also have been involved in the refugee crisis. 10 years ago, I started an NGO with some friends of mine, where we started getting onto the beaches of Greece when 10,000 people were arriving. And the number one rule when you get involved in a refugee crisis is don't really talk to the refugees, because they're so traumatized that they don't have time, they don't want to be involved, they don't want to do anything, they just want to get from A to B. Well, I was standing on the beaches with 3 of my friends, 10,000 people arriving every single day, and we couldn't do it alone. So we asked the refugees for help. We turned around to them, we said, hey, we're here, we need your help. We asked this vulnerable community to stand up, and they stood up. They started helping, they wanted to help. And when you ask people for help, when you give them the opportunity, the trust to stand up and be part of a community, again, the magic happens. In both of these stories, I have witnessed some of the most amazing stories of my personal experience of being a human being. I have seen humanity at its best, especially in these difficult times. Here in the Social Hub during COVID, people coming together to form a very, very, very strong community. In the refugee camps, running away from war and destruction, only busy offering you a cup of tea and inviting you into their tent. So when I read the first book by Rutger Bregman, Humankind, I was like, thank God, at last somebody's managed to articulate exactly what we've been experiencing. And that book, Humankind, that is in our hotel rooms today, is there because for me it really symbolizes that people are good. It shows, it proves, it debunks all of those theories, all of those things that we've been growing up with, that we've been taught are not true. And we are very, very good. On the back of that, it really promoted, pushed us, and persuaded us, empowered us to double down on being social. It's one of the reasons why we have social in the middle of our name. Not just about being social coming together, but being a social company, a responsible company. A company that gives back, that adds to the local community and to the wider neighborhood. Last year, we managed to persuade our investors to give away 1% of our revenues to create our own TSH Talent Foundation. And again, I think, fantastic, this is great. We can prove that it works. We can go back to our investors and prove that this 1% that we're giving away will lead to 3, 4, 5, 6% extra revenues. Because I know that I have to play the game in a capitalist society that money talks. And I'm happy playing those games. But when I've read the book Moral Ambition, I got even more excited because I thought, this is fantastic. This is something I really want to share with our co-working community, with the members of the Social Hub, and with, of course, our students, the future, the next generation talent, that we have 5,000, 6,000 of these next generation customers coming in the door every single year. So today, I am very, very excited to welcome somebody that I have a bit of a man crush on, to be honest. and my and now I dare to say my friend Rutger Bregman. Rutger.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for being here, Rutger. You're going to tell us a little bit about your book.
Absolutely.
There's going to be some Q&A after, so please think about those questions. Think about those things you want to ask Rutger. And I leave you to it, and I come back to you. Enjoy.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for this wonderful introduction, and thanks everyone for coming here tonight. You somehow managed to be here, even without, the trains. I think some of you came by horse, or how did you get here? Well, anyway, glad to see you all here. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the greatest questions of life, the greatest challenges that we face as a species. For this year, I spent about 4 years researching the human condition, and I want to share my most profound insight with you. Are you ready for it? It could be quite life-changing when you hear this, but I want to start with the bad news tonight. This is that you're all going to die. Now, not necessarily tonight, but quite soon. Life is short, right? So on average, a life lasts for around 4,000 weeks, and a career is even shorter. It lasts for around 80,000 hours, so that's 10,000 working days, and it's 2,000 work weeks. Really short. So let's visualize it. This is one work week, and here's your whole career. Now, what you do with this is one of the most important questions that you have to answer, one of the most important moral questions, I'd argue, that you have to answer in your life. Time, as you know, is a rare thing. It's a precious thing. No matter how rich you get, you can never buy yourself more time. And the problem I'd like to talk about with you today is this. I've come to call it the greatest waste of our time. Now, this is not waste of food or waste of plastic straws or anything like that. It's something much worse. It's the extraordinary waste of talent that is currently going on. So a couple of years ago, there were 2 Dutch economists who did a big study. They looked at more than 40 countries. It was a study with a data set that had more than 100,000 employees in it. And people were asked this simple question: what do you think about your job? Does it actually contribute something to society? Or put differently, what would happen if you would go on strike? Now, they had this really shocking finding that around 25% of people in the modern workforce think that their own job is socially useless. Now, the technical academic term for this is a bullshit job. As the late anthropologist David Graeber came up with that. It's a really interesting academic concept. Now, I got to define this properly, because you may be like, hey, that guy's a historian. That's like the definition of BS. Doesn't work that way. Now, people get to decide it for themselves, right? So if people say it about their own jobs, then we can say, yes, it really is a BS job, because, people are the experts on their own lives. And as I said, it's around 25% of people who really doubt the value of their own job. Now, if you further dig into the data, you will see some really interesting things. One thing you will see, for example, is that most of these people are in the private sector, not in the public sector. So the traditional stereotype is that, oh, the government, right, it's so wasteful, there's all these bureaucrats. Well, actually, you ask people themselves, and it turns out there are 3 times as many BS jobs in the private sector as in the public sector. Then you look even further and you see, hey, wait a minute, a lot of these people, they have gone to really good schools. They've got fancy resumes. They've maybe gone to elite universities, and they've got really nice job titles as well. They may be marketeers. That's a risky category. Or they could be, HR managers. Another one of those, or strategy consultants. So they have nice resumes, gone to good schools, earn very, nice salaries as well. But at the end of the day, if you ask them, maybe you need to give them a beer or 2, but then they'll, start confessing that, what I actually, what I'm doing, I could go on strike and no one would really care all that much. In one of my previous books, I looked at 2 strikes of 2 different professions. First, I looked at the strike of garbage collectors. Now, this was a strike that happened in 1968 in New York. Turns out we really can't do without garbage collectors. You know, it lasted for 6 days, and then the state of emergency had to be declared. And like, okay, we'll listen to you now. 2 years later, there was a strike of bankers in Ireland. This is the only strike in all of world history that I know of bankers saying, you know what, we are so important to the economy. Our wages are not keeping up with inflation. We're angry. We're going to show you just how important we are. Well, so the strike of the garbage collectors was 6 days. This one was 6 months. And nothing much happened. The economy just kept growing. And after 6 months, the bankers came back and said, all right. We'll get back to work. So this really forces you to rethink this basic question: who are the real wealth creators in our society, right? Charlie mentioned the pandemic. During the pandemic, we all realized that, hey, there are these people with these essential jobs. If they go on strike, like, we're fucked. But then, yeah, there's a whole class of people, 25%. It's 5 times the unemployment rate of people who maybe used to have big dreams, right? A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at Harvard, the very prestigious university. Well, read the application essays of these young people at Harvard, and they'll tell you things like, you know, I'm going to solve the climate crisis, global hunger, the tax evasion of the super rich. I'm going to do all of that. But then just a couple of years later, they get sucked up into what a friend of mine calls the Bermuda Triangle of talent, which is like corporate law and consultancy and finance. You know, it's this gaping black hole that sucks up so many of the so-called best and brightest, and we never hear from them again. It's really sad, honestly. So this is the greatest waste of our time, the waste of talent. Now, I also got to make a confession here. So this is where I currently am in my career. I've spent about 500 weeks of those 2,000 weeks. And I've spent all that time in what I like to call the awareness industry. So what that means is that you write articles, you write books, you stand on stages like this, and you express your opinions about everything that's wrong with this world. And then the hope is that the other people, the people listening, will do the actual work of making this world a much better place. That's sort of what my theory was for a decade. But I gotta admit that after doing that for all those years, I had a little bit of an early midlife crisis. I came to the conclusion that perhaps, you know, books aren't always that impactful. So here are some of my fans. It's not just Charlie. This is Ursula von der Leyen reading Humankind. That's Rupert Murdoch. This was in the age before AI, so that photo is real, I can assure you. He's reading my book about the 15-hour work week and abolishing poverty and open borders around the globe, and he really seems to be enjoying it. But yeah, again, I really had this nagging feeling that, you know, maybe it's not really enough, right? And maybe especially with Humankind. Yes, it was gratifying to hear from people like Charlie that, you know, for him, it was like, hey, I'm not weird. People are pretty decent deep down. But, I mean, he didn't need my book. He was already doing it, right? It was just nice to hear that he wasn't crazy. And at some point, I also saw these photos of people reading my book on a beautiful white beach in Bali. You know, saying, oh, this is a lovely holiday. I love my life. This is a fantastic book. It has restored my faith in humanity. And you know what? We all should stop following the news. Just be happy. Don't worry, right? And I was like, oh no, I've created a monster, right? This is like a license for apathy. So anyway, I thought, you know, I need something else. If like my previous book was like a warm hug, maybe the next one should be a cold shower. And the first one who deserves a cold shower is me. I really came to this conclusion that awareness is vastly overrated. Right? We know so much about the many, many problems in this world. Right? We know that 80 billion animals are tortured and slaughtered every year. Right? And we know it's not very nice to be a chicken in the factory farming industry. But yeah, so what are you going to do about it? We know, I guess, I'd hope you know that, what is it, about 85% of the world population lives even below the Dutch poverty line, right? We know that 15,000 kids die from easily preventable diseases every day. again, all fixable things. But yeah, do we actually bridge that gap from awareness to action? Because I think that the people and animals who are currently suffering, they don't care that we are so aware, right? They want you to actually do something. So I came up with this simple idea that could perhaps be the antidote to this waste of talent and to, this awareness industry that I was stuck in. And I've come to call it moral ambition. Now, moral ambition is the combination of a couple of things. It's the idealism of an activist and the ambition of an entrepreneur. And ideally, you'd also add the rigor of a scientist plus the humility of a monk. If you get all those things together, then the real magic starts to happen. Moral ambition is this desire to make this world a wildly better place, to stand on the right side of history before it is fashionable, not after the fact. And for me, it all started with studying some of the great moral pioneers of the past. This was a couple of years ago. I was like, maybe I can learn from them. Maybe I should start with the abolitionists, right? The abolitionists who built this great movement, first against the slave trade and then against slavery. And I wanted to learn more about how they actually did that. And I was really excited about it. I thought, you know what, I'm going to start with my own country, the Netherlands. Surely there's a fantastic story to tell here. Well, to be honest, that would have been a very short book. The abolitionist movement here in the Netherlands was very ineffective. It was a bunch of Calvinist social justice warriors who mainly cared about their own moral purity and spent a lot of time gazing at their own navel, but didn't get much done. Then I thought, well, maybe the French, maybe they did a better job. Well, a lot of writers and intellectuals like me, writing big books and manifestos about human rights. But again, they didn't really build an effective movement. In Portugal, there was pretty much nothing. In Spain, there was pretty much nothing. And in the US, well, it famously took a civil war, and even celebrated presidents like Abraham Lincoln really did not want to be called an abolitionist before the war. It's like worse than being a vegan today. So it turned out that there was this one exception in the Western world, and this was Britain. And I got really interested in this movement because here hundreds of thousands of people were galvanized, joined this movement. And it was the first time in all of human history that hundreds of thousands of people started advocating for other people's rights, right? We had seen revolutions before, we had seen movements before, but that was always when people started advocating for themselves. And this was the first time that people were really rising up against something that wasn't really threatening them. Actually, in many cases, they were benefiting from it. And I got really curious, like, what made this movement different? The first guy I stumbled upon was this guy with really good hair, much better than mine, Thomas Clarkson. He was a 25-year-old student at Cambridge University. Initially, he was just an ambitious guy. He wanted to make a career in the Church of England, and he participated in an essay contest. This was in the age before TikTok, right? So if you wanted to become famous, right, to break through, you wouldn't make some nice reels. No, you would participate in one of those essay contests. And purely by chance, that year, the question that Clarkson had to answer was, is it morally okay? Is it defensible to own and sell other human beings? Now, this was a question that he had never really thought about all that much, actually. Initially, it was just like an intellectual exercise for him. Then he started digging in, doing the research, and he's a bright guy. So 2 months later, he had won first prize. He came to Cambridge to the beautiful Senate House. There was a nice, fancy ceremony for him. And then there's this famous moment when he goes back to London where he lived. So he's on a horse. This was, just like today in an era without trains. And he was just going back to London. And he kept thinking about this thing he had written. Like he was still in that awareness phase. But he thought, if this is really true, what I've written, that slavery and the slave trade, these are like the great moral atrocities of our time, then shouldn't someone do something about this? And this is the thing. Every time you think, hey, shouldn't someone do something about this? That person is probably you. Now, this is also what Thomas Clarkson realized. If you read his memoirs, then you read about a young guy who could suddenly see himself as the world historical hero taking on this great challenge, this great threat. And on the one hand, you think, okay, well, this guy is a bit full of himself. But then you read further and you realize, okay, so he did do it, right? He did devote 61 years, the rest of his life, to fighting the slave trade and, building this huge movement. He traveled 35,000 miles across the United Kingdom to spread this abolitionist propaganda everywhere. And he founded the British Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787. Now, when I started researching that society, I learned something else. That this British movement, it wasn't led by intellectuals and writers, people like me. No, it was led by entrepreneurs. Thomas Clarkson was actually the exception. There were 12 founders of the British Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade. One was a writer, that was Thomas. One was a lawyer. Sometimes they can be useful. But 10 out of 12 were entrepreneurs. So these were, today we would say like startup founders. They had built their own companies, they had scaled their own companies. Some of them would maybe have been in, the Forbes 400, if that would have existed at the time. But the reason we remember them today is obviously not because they were conventionally successful, because they made money. No, the reason we remember them today is because they took on the greatest moral atrocity of their time and built this huge movement. So that's an essential ingredient of moral ambition. It's not just the idealism of an activist, it's also the ambition of an entrepreneur. So that leads me to the question, who are the abolitionists of today? Because it's easy for us to look back on those, people who are pretty heroic and say, oh, well, that's admirable. But then what will the historians of the future say about us, right? Every civilization throughout history has always believed that, we are the most civilized ones. That's what the Romans said, right? The Romans said, when they were having lunch in the Colosseum and watching naked women being thrown before the lion, they said, we're so civilized because we don't sacrifice kids to the gods anymore. Well, that wasn't really true. And so it's tempting to think that, here we are in the 21st century, maybe we've all figured it out. Well, that would be quite coincidental, would it? I think it's quite likely that today we are still doing things, and that all of us here today are still complicit in things that the historians of the future will be horrified by. And as I said, moral ambition is about standing on the right side of history before it is fashionable. And that by definition means that it's going to be uncomfortable, right? This is, again, easy to forget. These abolitionists had to suffer an enormous amount of ridicule and shame, and in some cases even had to fear for their life. So that's, I think, one of the more important questions we have to answer. Now let's look at a couple of ingredients of what it means to be morally ambitious. The first one, well, I've already talked a little bit about it. We got to try and come up with a different definition of success. It's not about that fancy job title. It's not about getting the corner office. That's all honestly a bit boring. We can strive for something much more interesting. There's this beautiful quote from Ellen Rain, a writer, who wrote more than a century ago that people may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find out at the end, once they reach the top, that the ladder was standing against the wrong wall the whole time. And a lot of you are still young, so that's one of the benefits, is that, you still have a lot of those weeks ahead of you. I gotta admit that initially I had a passage in my book that said, if you're past the age of 30, then you're probably lost, If you have a set of cheese knives and a robot mower and a labradoodle, then it's over. Now, my publisher made me remove that passage because it's bad for book sales. And it's obviously also not true. I mean, there are beautiful examples of people who really managed to change course after their 30s. But yeah, it's important to start thinking about these questions early in life. So the second ingredient is also very important. This is about the focus on maximum impact. And I say this to my progressive and my leftist friends in particular, because what I hear from them quite a lot are things like, small is beautiful. Or they tell me that less is more. But again, I can tell you that I spend a lot of time studying this question and really trying to find out whether that's actually true. And it turns out that actually more is more. So if we really dig into that, imagine you help one person, right? That's great. But if you help two people, then that is twice as much. right? So this is mathematics. And it's really important to keep that in mind, right? We face enormous challenges as a species. We can't do everything at the same time, so we got to choose, right? This is the entrepreneurial mindset. You're always looking for that gap in the market. You're trying to go where other people aren't going, right? That's where you can make the biggest impact. So keep that in mind more and more. In the fight against injustice, winning is a moral duty. You know, all those, as we talked about, all those people and animals who are currently suffering, they don't care about the fact that you are right or that you tried. You really do not want to be a noble loser. You know, the kind of people like who say, "Oh well, we lost the elections again, but we were so virtuous, right? We were really standing on the right side." No. Winning is a moral duty. And then the second ingredient is what I've come to call the Gandalf-Frodo model of doing good. Not sure you're all familiar with the story of Gandalf and Frodo. Maybe I should recap the story. So one day, Gandalf knocks on Frodo's door and says, "Look, there's a situation down south in the country. There's this evil wizard who has arisen and who is probably going to kill us all, unless, and that's the good news, unless you throw this little ring into this fiery mountain, then we all survive." The bad news is that this is actually next door to where he lives, so you have to go to this evil land of Mordor to do it. It's really important to analyze this story closely and to know that there's one thing that Gandalf did not say to Frodo. So he was not the typical job coach. He didn't say, "Hey, Frodo, what's your passion?" Right? He didn't do that. No, he said, "Look, this is the world's to-do list, and this is at the very top of the world's to-do list. You got to do this, man. I'm talking to you. Do it." That's the follow the Gandalf model of doing good. And honestly, I think this can be quite liberating. There are a lot of Gen Zers and millennials out there who are thinking like, "Oh, who am I?" Right? What should I do with my one precious life on this planet? What is my passion? And then we have an army of job coaches, right? LinkedIn is full of them saying like, "Well, let me help you find out. It's going to be pretty expensive, but let me help you find out." And you know what? I don't think you need to find yourself a job coach. You need to find yourself a Gandalf, a wise old wizard. It doesn't start with the question, "Oh, what's my passion?" No, it starts with saying, "Here I am. Tell me, what can I do?" Right? What are the biggest problems that we face today? Because there are quite a few. Now, there's also a useful model that we can use to try and find out what these biggest challenges are. I've come to call it the triple S framework. So we are looking for problems that are very sizable. That's really important. We are looking for problems that are solvable, right? Got to actually have a good idea, a good theory of change, of making progress on that problem. And then finally, it's got to be sorely neglected. I know I'm cheating a little bit with that, but I just wanted to alliterate, right? The triple S framework. Now, in the heart of that, you will find your moral ambition. Let me give you one example. Take something like climate change, right? This is a very sizable, big problem, threatening all of us, basically billions of people on this planet. The good news is it's also very solvable, right? We've got all kinds of ideas, technologies, policies that we could implement. So yes. Is it also sorely neglected? I would say less and less so, right? More and more people are working on it. The climate movement today consists of millions of people. So if you want to be really morally ambitious, I would encourage you to look for the most neglected aspects of the fight against climate change. Take something like food, for example. 20% of all emissions come from our food system. That's mostly meat and dairy. And compared to other sources of emissions, like cars or aviation, for example, very little is happening in the food space. Just if you look at the investment alone, I mean, Germany has spent up more than 200 billion euros on scaling up solar energy, and that's going very well. But then the whole world spends around 1.5 billion, so just like 1%, less than 1% on R&D in the food space. So this is really where we need more talented people to work on that challenge. You could also say like, hey, what was the best time to be a climate activist? Well, honestly, it wasn't today. It's not today. It was in the 70s, right? When the movement was still really small. Then your impact would have been much bigger if you would have joined that movement. So you could also ask yourself the question, what are some problems that are, where climate change was in the 1970s, because they really need you. A couple of examples are things like pandemic prevention is super neglected. We've just gone through a terrible pandemic. The next one may be much worse, and the world is doing almost nothing about it. Something like factory farming, I already talked about it, the incredible suffering of 80 billion animals, very small movement still. Or terrible diseases that are taking so many lives. I'm currently reading a book about tuberculosis, taking 1.2 million lives every year. Compare that to natural disasters, that's 60,000. So this is like orders of magnitude bigger. One out of 7 people who ever lived died from tuberculosis, and most of us know shit about it, right? And again, the good news is that there are things we can do about it here, right? You just have to follow the Gandalf, right? Don't start with your own passion, but start with an open mind, learning about these things, trying to find out what you can do. And that's where your moral ambition is. Now, you can say, Rutger is still stuck in the awareness phase, right? He's turned to some kind of job coach, and he still wants us to do the actual work of making the world a better place. Well, honestly, I also realized that after a decade, maybe it was time to have some skin in the game. I experienced this emotion that I sometimes describe as moral envy. Right? You're looking at the people who are actually in the arena, building things, trying things out, and I was like, I want to be like them. So 2 years ago, I found myself some ambitious entrepreneurs, people who actually know how to build something, and together we co-founded the School for Moral Ambition. What we're trying to do is to help as many people as possible to pivot their careers and to use what they have. Could be their human capital, their talent, could also be their financial capital, their cultural capital, their personal capital, just their health. Like, use what you have to make this world a wildly better place. Don't just check your privilege, but also use it to make a difference. Now, sometimes we like to see ourselves as the Robin Hoods of talent. I think we all know about Robin Hood, who famously took away the money from the rich and gave it to the poor. Well, we think that's a very worthwhile endeavor, but we also need to take the talent away from the rich and give it to the poor. So, for example, we're currently building a tax fairness fellowship. That means we are recruiting some of the best fiscal lawyers we can find accountants, bankers, people who really understand everything about our broken financial and fiscal system, really understand all the loopholes, and who are currently working, for the empire. And we're trying to recruit them for the Rebel Alliance, basically for us, for the people. We think this is so important, to find these entrepreneurial, ambitious people who are often currently, stuck in jobs that are a bit socially meaningless. And we basically want to liberate them. We started last year, actually here in the Netherlands, but I've recently moved to New York with my family to build the movement there as well. We now have 13,000 members across more than 100 countries, and obviously you're all welcome to join. We don't just have our fellowships, which you have to apply for, but we also have our moral ambition circles. And these are small groups of 6 to 8 people who come together around these questions. Now, we really do not pretend that we have all the answers, but we think we are asking the right questions. We help people to start with thinking about, what are my superpowers? What would Gandalf say? What are some of the greatest challenges we face? What's the match between my talents and these challenges? How can I take that first step? And how can we hold each other accountable? Sometimes I like to say that we're trying to build a safe space for do-gooders. I think sometimes when idealists, go to work, they, in a corporate environment especially, it's easy to become cynical, right? Because people are like, look, you're such a do-gooder, right? All of that will never work. We're trying to build environments where you're surrounded with people who are like, yes, of course we can do this. And I think, you can actually do twice as much. That is what the School for Moral Ambition aspires to be. This is all grounded in an old saying from Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. He said that we should never doubt the power of small and thoughtful groups of committed citizens to change the world. And it's especially that last line, indeed, it's the only thing that ever has, that has always struck me. What she's basically saying here is that most people, to be honest, don't change the world. Right? Most people are herd animals. That's the other aspect of being social, right? We copy one another, and very often we copy each other's cynicism as well, each other's laziness. But that also means if small groups of thoughtful, committed citizens show that things can be done differently, that we can start a revolution together, right? Doing good can be incredibly contagious. I mean, Charlie already mentioned this, the power of being asked. For this book, I looked at the resistance movement in this country during the Second World War. As you all know, the Nazis occupied this country, and I was interested in this question: what gave some people the courage to hide persecuted Jews in their homes? Right? Why did they risk their lives to help others? And it turns out there wasn't such a thing as the psychology of the resistance hero, because this was really a cross-section of the population. People from the left to the right, rich, poor, young, old, introverts, extroverts, there was really nothing there. There was, however, a sociology of resistance, right? People were inspiring each other. In 96% of all cases, when people were asked to do something, they said yes. So for me, that is such a fundamental insight. In the end, it's not that you do good things because you are a good person. No, it's the other way around. Is you become a good person by doing good things. So it's just a matter of getting started, and very often getting started starts with someone else asking you that question. So I think that's basically how you consider this whole talk by me tonight. It's basically my question to you. Like, are you ready to do something, right? And very often it can start small. Like these resistance heroes during the Second World War, it started with distributing an illegal newspaper, for example. But then once you start doing the work, you will see it will transform you as a person, and you will become someone that you would never thought you could be. That's what we see again and again. I was reading Martin Luther King's memoirs the other day, and he also said, like, if people would have asked me to lead the civil rights movement when I was 26, when he got involved, I would have run 1,000 miles. But it sort of happened. And I think that's very often what you see. When we look back on the great figures of history, Thomas Clarkson, Frederick Douglass, MLK, we're like, oh, there's like almost like a different species of people. No, they're people just like us. It's just that they were asked a question, they answered the call, and they started doing the work. That's it. So, as I said, you're very welcome in our movement. Again, we don't have all the answers. We're just trying to get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rutger.
Thanks, Charlie.
Very inspiring.
Yeah.
And very nice to hear.
Shall we sit down?
Yes, indeed. We have a couple of Q&A from the audience, but I'm going to steal my moment, if I may.
Of course.
So I guess I'm kind of inspired because the question I have is, we have a lot of people in the audience, of course, but we have, as you know, we have a lot of co-workers in our business. We have a lot of students, future generation that you were talking about. I was thinking about, when I look at your fellowship and you look at the people that have joined, is there a moment that you recognize that helped them move away from, hey, this sounds like a good idea, this sounds interesting for me, but yeah, it's not for me? I mean, what sort of advice would you have to take that first step? I mean, is there something you see that there's a common denominator among them all?
So I've got an answer to that question, but I want to hear your answer as well. Because my answer would be like, it's all about finding that small group of people, right? It's about being infected by this idea. Yeah. For me, it was about meeting people in history. I mean, I'm a historian, so I was reading Thomas Clarkson's memoirs, and I was experiencing this moral envy. Like, here I am in this suburb called Houghton, and I've got only one life on this planet. I should be doing something much more meaningful, right? But also meeting other people, entrepreneurs like you, people who are building organizations. And for a long time, I thought that, starting an organization, for example, I thought, that's not something I do because I'm just not an entrepreneurial guy. It took me a while to realize that actually you become a builder by building, right? I mean, Aristotle said this long ago. You become a harpist by playing the harp. So it's not about who you are deep down. It's about who you can become and just getting started. And that becomes much easier if you surround yourself with certain people. I've got this one quote in the book by the economist Tyler Cowen, who says that one of the greatest things you can do to make this world a better place is to increase other people's level of ambition. It's the thing I love doing the most right now. It's basically talking to people and hearing about their plans for life and then saying like, I think you can do that and I think you can do twice as much actually. Exactly. It's the simple power of the question. But how did it happen for you? I'm curious.
Yeah, for me, I think I kind of set off on my entrepreneur business, etc. Went through the whole great financial crisis, had nice moments of giving the keys back to the bank, and kind of survived all that. And at some point, I could see the future of our business, and I knew we were going to be okay. But there was something in my soul. There was like a piece of the sort of Charlie MacGregor jigsaw that I was aware was missing. And I didn't know where it was. I was like, fuck, I've kind of survived all this and I can see we're going to be okay, but is this it? And so for me, it was really the moment when I saw my co-founders of Movement Underground on the beaches. And I realized that I'm sitting on my CEO stool and I'm trying to do all this nice stuff. And I realized that I needed to get on the ground. And by getting off my CEO chair and by going to do something myself, as you said, just doing it, just getting there. And then I got the bug. And then I felt this is so much more empowering and satisfying and just fun. I mean, it was like instantaneous fun, you know? And I think what's interesting on the business point of view, and this is I say on quite a lot of panels as well, is by getting off that CEO chair, by changing your environment, the insights that you have to yourself and I guess the happiness of the soul, you know, and we had a colleague as well, it's interesting, Jurgen van den Berg, as you're watching. He came from Scotch and Soda. He came in and helped us set up our whole sort of financial system. Absolute genius, worked like a dog, brilliant guy. He took a holiday and he started teaching for a few days in a local school. And he came back and he said, see ya. And he left us to become a teacher. And I think that for I guess my question is, I made that decision when I was past 30, Jurgen as well, but what advice would you give to the students, you know, who are, I guess, the next generation and where we are teaching them as society that job title, that financial security, that house that you want to buy, you need to have, you know, this career, you need to get university, you need to go and work at McKinsey, happy days, you're getting six figure. What advice would you give them to break that sort of that mold that we've set them?
Yeah. Well, it depends, obviously. I mean, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, I was at Harvard, and about 45% of Harvard graduates end up, you know, as a consultant or at Wall Street, right? Which is just, for me, it's really shocking, right? You have such a prestigious universities and genuinely very bright kids, and then this is what they all do, right? How does that happen? And I think one thing that really appeals to them about, say, the McKinsey track, for example, is that they can preserve their optionality, right? McKinsey has been really good at hacking these young people's brains. Many of them are insecure overachievers. They really have no clue what to do with the rest of their life. And then someone comes along and says, hey, you can just extend basically your school period, right? You don't have to commit yet. You can just, you know, become a consultant, jump from project to project. You don't have to commit to anything. But then what starts to happen is that, you know, the golden handcuffs start to tighten and they come in a certain kind of social circle where they don't really meet cool people anymore, at least my definition of cool, you know, people who are actually builders. And yeah, sort of life happens then to them or it goes by. So for those people, I would really encourage a couple of things, like surround yourself with the right people, you know, find yourself that small group of ambitious idealists. That's really important, like who your peers are. That makes it much easier for you to stay idealistic. And the second thing is commit to something. Like when you're young, don't obsess over preserving your optionality, right? Just go for something. If you've always thought about you wanted to become a mother or a father, go and do it. Don't wait for it, right? Build a family. If you're like, I want to start a company, do it now.
Do it right
Drop out of school if that's necessary. If you got the idea, go for it. I think that's really a simple piece of life advice. Like, your 20s are for committing, because you find out who you are by doing shit, by building, by creating, by making choices. And, maybe after 5 years, you're like, okay, it's time for something else.
Yeah.
There's this venture capitalist, quite controversial guy, Peter Thiel, not really my, political circles, but he wrote a brilliant book about entrepreneurship. It's called 0 to 1. And in that book, he talks about the power of cults. Right? A little bit like what Margaret Mead said, the small groups of really committed people. It's almost like a cult, right? They have this big idea. Very often a startup works like that as well, right? You have this one big idea, like you think that you know where the gap in the market is, and that's how you're going to do it, and you're going to work 70 hours a week to make it happen. Like, you have to be a little bit crazy to do that. Now, Peter Thiel asked this question, like, what's the opposite of a cult? And he says, well, pretty simple, it's a consultancy firm. Right? As a consultant, you jump from project to project, and you never really commit to something, right? You just live your life that way. And those are, I think, my main pieces of advice. Find your group of like-minded idealists, and then go for it.
Good advice. So all of you out there. And before I hand over to the audience, and maybe a bit more of a provocative question, as I sit here, I realize that we're two white, middle-aged, apart from my man crush, straight, able-bodied males, successful. I mean, who the fuck are we to be talking about this? How do we kind of overcome that sort of that statement or that prejudice, the fact that we're sitting here lecturing or people to do something different? What do we say to that?
So there's a lot to be said about this, but I want to start with this simple remark that, honestly, I'm really angry. I'm really angry at people in my bubble. I've seen, some of my friends go into this gaping black hole of consultancy and finance. I've seen entrepreneurs build companies and then give nothing to charity. I see so many people with a lot of privilege who are just hoarding that privilege and not really building anything. As I said during my talk, I think it's not just about checking your privilege, but also using it to make this world a wildly better place. Now, obviously, you gotta really educate yourself on the perspective of the most marginalized people. This is actually where the SSS framework is essential. I said sizable, solvable, and sorely neglected. Well, I could also have said sorely marginalized. One of the causes we work on with the School for Moral Ambition, one of our fellowships, is devoted to the fight against the tobacco industry. Now, when I say that to a lot of my friends, they're like, tobacco, really? I mean, why not biodiversity or something like that? And like, yeah, I know you care about biodiversity because that's you, right? You go to Vlieland every year, right, to sip white wine, and then, you're not happy about what's happening to the ecosystem there, and I get that. None of your friends smoke anymore. But in this country, we have a gap of more than 20 years in terms of healthy life years, because basically one of the big reasons is that the tobacco industry is deliberately targeting the most vulnerable, low-income groups, marginalized communities, to deliberately make them addicted and to earn as much money on them. And yeah, a lot of highly educated people don't give a shit because they're so healthy, right? They follow all these influencers, etc. But this is, again, all about following the Gandalf. It doesn't start with your own passion. You don't get your best ideas as you drink that white wine on Vlieland. That's not how you're going to make the biggest impact. It starts with actually listening, doing the research, educating yourself on what are the most pressing things that need to happen.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Thank you. So questions, maybe throwing the microphone to the audience. We have a couple of hands here. I'm going to let you ask a question. I'm going to run and get you water. Excuse me.
Yes, is it working? Yeah. Thank you so much. It was super interesting. I have a question and / like an advice to ask you, because I'm working in a financial company in a sustainability impact team, and I'm working on human rights. And I guess you could think that, I think about a bit like effective altruism type of thing, where this actually I think where I can have a great impact by being in it. But then at the same time, for sure, that's a question that is always coming to my mind. Like, am I actually having an impact? You know what I mean? Because like financial, like we know they have a lot of money, can have great impact, but is it actually happening? That's another question. And I guess, I think a lot of people now actually do have this potential of having those jobs, right? Like working in sustainability in those companies.
Yeah.
where actually I do think the company is trying to do good, but again, and my question is like, what would you say actually regarding what you shared tonight as well? Because I guess what you're saying is like actually maybe to look at actually what are those issues and to really go for this might be more impactful than this. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this, because that's something I'm thinking a lot about. Yes, thank you.
Cool, great question. Well, look, first off, you're the real expert on your own job, right? But here are a couple of thoughts that come to mind. What we see today in the corporate world is a lot of impact washing. That's what I would call it. A lot of young people care about impact, right? There's a war of talent going on. You know, companies in this tight labor market really want to find the most talented people. And then one of the things they say is, hey, you come and work for us and you make the world a better place. But you really dig in and then you see that they're mostly looking for what I would describe as a moral minimum, right? So use a little bit less plastic, offset your carbon emissions, maybe donate a little bit here and there incidentally, but that's about it. And I think we're now facing such big challenges as a species, whether it's climate breakdown or authoritarian takeover, that the whole idea, the whole notion that the moral minimum is going to be enough to preserve civilization itself is just bollocks, right? It's so naive. We need to be looking for our moral maximum, especially if we have a certain amount of privilege, right? Then we can try and push ourselves and really use what we have, all forms of capital, the personal capital, the human capital, the financial capital, to make a much bigger difference. Now, can you do that within a corporation? I think the answer is yes, but it's not easy. So we have people in our community who are intrapreneurs, so not entrepreneurs, but intrapreneurs, who are like the what's the word? The troublemakers, who keep annoying their CEOs and saying like, hey, why, like, the Social Hub, for example. Sorry. But for example, like the Social Hub, they're already donating, right? A part of the revenue. Like, why aren't we doing it? Right? This should become normal. AFOS recently, Charlie and I had a lunch today at AFOS. You know, they recently donated 30% of their shares to their own foundation, right? And why not? Why don't we do that? I think that could be very, very valuable as an employee of a company. You can really make a big difference because, yeah, the owners and the investors, they often care about, especially again in a tight labor market like this. Yes, it's important. So don't let them get away with their impact washing. Be the annoying person and help them to become a better person.
And maybe just to follow that on, I mean, if you think about the Gandalf Frodo, you can be the Gandalf. You can also, you know, frame it to your employer, to your CEO. Hey, you need to do more. I'm looking to you. I give you a mission. And I think we see it as Social Hub. We see a lot of people coming to join us. In the beginning, it was because of Movement on the Ground, you know, the charity and stuff like that. And that really emboldened us to call ourselves the Social Hub, to put it right in the middle of our name and step by step by step. But you do become, so maybe the CEO is waiting there thinking, yeah, I want to do the same, but yeah, I just need that little nudge.
Yeah.
Nice question. Thank you.
I enjoyed the discussion. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I followed the path, but I have a question. We have no parliament at this moment in this country because it's on the ground. Tomorrow the bell rings. You're invited to become the Minister of Finance. You love the capitalism system. What is the first thing in the first day you do to make more impact to change the system?
As Minister of Finance, oh wow. I mean, I was really inspired about the basic income. I think that's something that's really interesting. Maybe you can talk a bit more about that. And personally, I would like to build into my government, in this case, long-term thinking. You know, for me, the biggest solution that we should do as society is invest in education. You know, and if we're investing in certainly education from even under 5 on how to eat healthily, how to cook healthily, what is a healthy food, etc., and really investing in these type of things, and how to be a human being, how to handle your emotions, how to communicate properly. Some of the basic human skills that we miss, to be honest, when we see, you know, the older children coming off the mum and dad production line, they come and live with us, and we're seeing more and more this feeling of loneliness. I don't know how to say hello to. I don't know how to make friends to people.
Mm.
And I think, so for me, I would really double down on education, and I would really look at basic income and some of the things I've taken from you. But maybe you can add to some of these. What would you do?
Yeah, maybe one thing. So I'm a shameless globalist. I'm a shameless cosmopolitan. I'm a citizen of the world. And that's not in fashion today. I know we're all reverting back to an age of nationalism and saying, like, my people in my country are the only people I care about. And this isn't just happening in the United States. I mean, in this country, we've seen massive, massive cuts to development aid. And I thought it was really depressing to see that basically no one gave a shit, even my friends on the left. I mean, just before the last election, there was a poll asking people about, what is the most important topic to you? And this was the least important of all the things. Only 0.1% of people actually said, development aid, and that we preserve what we do. That's important. So that's honestly one of the things I do, because I think it's really important that we keep remembering that we're part of a much bigger family. I think that most moral progress throughout history has come from expanding the moral circle, caring about people who are, not the people we see on the streets, not our immediate family, friends, and colleagues, but those whom we often can't see. I talked a lot about the greatest movement for human rights that this world has ever seen, or the mother of all movements, which was the abolitionist movement. And it was the first time that people really cared about something that wasn't threatening them, when they start advocating for people who are very far away. And like my whole life, I'll be shamelessly advocating for that, even when it becomes politically unpopular. So I will reinstate development aid as we have it, and probably double it, because there's so much low-hanging fruit here, and there are very effective things we can do to things like malaria, tuberculosis. Like, we could have solved these problems many decades ago.
Okay. Nice question. Thank you.
Thank you. I've one question. I'm within the Bermuda circle, so to speak, or triangle, and I'm part of your moral School for Ambition. What I saw was that the people within my circle and the previous circle mainly were the people that already were working on, for me, the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for similar people from the Bermuda Triangle within the School of Moral Ambition,
Mm-hmm.
and they were kind of hard to find. How will you make sure that you will reach the right people to really make an impact with the School of Ambition, and to reach those people whose talented are maybe a little bit missed?
That's really interesting. Honestly, that's the first time I heard that. So we've built this online platform where you can see basically all our 13,000 members, and maybe that is a helpful tool to perhaps start another circle. Maybe you could even write a little post there and say, like, hey, I'm currently in a too impactful circle. I'm looking for people who are really looking to make the jump. But this is honestly something that we're trying to get better at as well. And I honestly think that you might be, you're a consultant, or are you? Yeah. Well, that sounds like the skill set we could use. Maybe you can help us build something that will help us connect people, right? As I said, if you think someone should really do something, then it's probably you. No, honestly, yeah. Yeah, we're really trying to get better at that. Currently, we have our online platform, but we're continuously improving it to really help and connect people. That's the most important thing we're trying to do there.
I think we have time for one more question, two more questions.
Maybe one or two from online.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, have we got
Over
maybe
on
a
this side?
question over on this side of the? This side, there's a hand over here. Sorry, I can't see.
Benefit of yours.
Hi, Rutger. You touch upon yourself being sort of a cosmopolitan, and I think also with the amount of books you're able to read, of course, and sort of your education, I think you can find yourself quite a deep purpose, maybe being a cosmopolitan, feeling like a human that sort of transcends maybe the national borders of culture. But I think a lot of people in our society nowadays struggle with that. I think young people, because of social media, micro trends that change sort of every day, struggle sort of finding a purpose and finding a national identity or identity in general. In general.
Mm-hmm.
How would you sort of bridge that? Like, how do you make sure that young people that feel like more and more disassociated with maybe a strong, deep culture, at the same time also a big part of society that maybe also doesn't read all those history and philosophy books, also maybe feels like their culture and their country is changing a lot because of immigration or whatever kind of reason they want to give to it? Like, how do you make sure that those people still feel included in society? I'm really curious what you think of that.
So there's a study that's been done in the United States since the 1960s. It's called the American Freshman Survey. And students have been asked ever since then about their most important life goals. And what you see is that in the 1960s, the late 1960s, around 90% of all students said that one of their most important life goals was to develop a meaningful philosophy of life. And only 50% of students back then said that making a lot of money was one of their most important life goals. Now today, those numbers have reversed. It's now 90% of people saying that making a lot of money is their most important life goal. Now, the fact that this used to be different makes me both a bit pessimistic, but also optimistic. It's obviously gone in the wrong direction, but this also means we're not talking about human nature here. It can change, right? It's culture. And when I studied the great movements of the past, again, the British abolitionists, but also the move from the Gilded Age to the progressive era in the United States. This was the late 19th century going to the early 20th century. What I see was that there was a countercultural movement that was all about making doing good more fashionable. So if you'd have asked someone like Thomas Clarkson or William Wilberforce, two of the main British abolitionists, what their life's mission was, they wouldn't have said abolishing the slave trade. They would have said, we're trying to change the culture here. We think that doing good, right? That should be the most prestigious thing. And it's the same with the move from the Gilded Age to the progressive era. So it's often said that we're now living in the second Gilded Age, right? So that means we're living through an era of incredible immorality and corruption. I think it's so clearly on display, obviously in the United States with the current president, but also in this country. There's just also a deep level of unseriousness, I would say. We just had this clown cabinet in this country. And what happened in the late 19th century, when also the elites who were in power back then were also deeply unserious and deeply immoral and detached from ordinary people and their realities, is that other people started a countercultural movement. And after, to be honest, back to your question, Charlie, this often started with people who had a certain measure of privilege. So take someone like Theodore Roosevelt, the president of the United States, the first progressive president, really one of the great figures of history, a Harvard graduate actually. He famously said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that to complain about a problem and not do something about it is called whining. Like he was like utterly fed up. He was just angry about many of his peers who weren't really doing anything to make his country a better place. And that's honestly what I think we need today. We need a movement of people, who sometimes have a certain measure of privilege, who have the time to read a book or anything like that. But they're not going to stand on the sidelines. They're not going to point at others. No, they're going to look in the mirror and they're going to be like, you know what? I'm going to start doing this. And then it's going to be a contagious thing, right? And then it's going to spread. And also important, we're going to celebrate the people who do the work, right? Tomorrow we have our Business for Good conference in Amsterdam with the School for More Ambition. We're organizing that. And it gives me so much joy that we will have the opportunity to put entrepreneurs on a stage who are really devoting their whole careers to making this world a wildly better place. We will have from Australia a guy called Adam McCurdy, who founded Humanitix, which is the biggest online ticketing platform right now in Australia. And they don't donate 5%, they don't donate 50%, no, they donate 100% of all profits to the most effective charities they can find. By the way, Adam is a former strategy consultant, so he was able to get out, which is wonderful. What we're doing is we're putting these people on a stage, on a pedestal, and saying, like, this is awesome, right? That is what it means to make real impact. And I honestly think that cultural work, could be very effective. We need much more of it. But yeah, it's often when things get really, really dark, as they get now, that also the opportunities open up to make this world a wildly better place.
And sorry, Daniel, I'm screwing your time up. How do you feel about the future? Like when what do you think where we are in sort of that that moment in time? Are you optimistic about where we are, or
Look,
do you
Charlie,
cry every night? And
I think one of the simplest lessons that you learn as a historian is that, like, take the 1920s or the 1930s in Germany. People didn't know how it was going to end. Often when we study history, we're like, oh, we know what comes after that, right? But people back then didn't know, and it was flexible, right? It wasn't bound to happen. It could have gone in a different way. That is so important to keep in mind. So yes, as a historian, I see disturbing similarities. Like I agree with my colleagues, like Roger Griffin or Timothy Snyder, who basically say, yeah, this is fascism. This is what it is, right? We've studied this. This is what it is. That's what's happening in the US science, the early signs of fascism. But that's not like inevitable, right? We've seen many moments in history, like recently in Poland, for example. Poland became a very authoritarian country, and there was an incredibly successful protest movement against it. And there's still a lot of work to do there. But we have agency. I think that's we're not bystanders. We're not watching a Netflix show, and just watching as history happens. We are the players, right? I think that's the essential thing to keep in mind.
because we see it also as well. We just did a survey of our coworker and community if they would be willing to give back, if they wanted to give back. 97% of our community said, yeah, we want to give back. We want to help spend our time to give back, to help other people.
Yeah.
And I think what we also see with the next generation that are coming in every year, there's definitely been a wave of sort of trapped in your own bubble where they're afraid to voice an opinion because they're being pigeonholed and stigmatized, etc. Where there's a bit of a rebellion against that and really looking to connect as humans. And we do when we take people to our camps in refugee camps. It's really nice to just begin with the basics. The first thing we do on any refugee camp is just start cleaning. So then indeed there's these sort of white privileged people just walking around the refugee camp cleaning.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're asking the people whose tent you're cleaning around, saying, hey, do you want to come and help me? Come on. And you start to have fun, and you start to build a community, and you start to just do things from a really small level. And it has this. So I'm actually quite positive about the sort of, I think also with your book, what you said in Humankind, in times of crisis, and people come together. We see also in the B Corp community, because of this wave of anti-ESG, the B Corp community are really starting to come together and saying, shit, wow, we're under attack and we need to really work together, which will help, of course, drive business within the B Corp community, which will encourage more businesses to become part of the B Corp community. So the pressure is forcing kind of a change. And then, good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 2 more questions from online. This one actually ties to what you were just saying, Charlie, about our co-working community. So hotels are known for being incredibly unsustainable. If I were to work at the Social Hub, how would I be contributing to society?
Yeah, very nice. I mean, we have when you put together a brand, you have the why. Why do you get out of bed every day? And the why we get out of bed every day for the Social Hub is we believe bringing people together creates a better society. And that sounds pretty lofty. We're pretty aware that's pretty altruistic, but it's based on the fact that we've seen bringing students with locals, with professionals, with hotel communities all together. You have a very much better mix of society. The same as in refugee camps, when bringing people together and empowering people and giving trust, you get so much back. So for us, it is really encouraging people to connect to each other as human beings, to connect with yourself. Ask yourself, hey, am I happy or should I be doing something else? And just ask, and just with your vulnerability, connect with other people. And I think that's where we as a company are focusing our S on the S part of being social, and trying to help people discuss the difficult topics. We host every year a Better Society Master Academy, where we bring different groups together, whether talking, bringing the whole queer community together, or climate change, trying to bring sort of Extinction Rebel and Shell together. But in this environment, just talking about the difficult things. And I think my main takeaway for that, and what I would encourage whoever's online, is what we're able to do here is realize through these conversations that there's so much more that connects us than what separates us. And we're in a society today where we're only hearing this sort of echo chamber, the World Wide Web connected us all, but it's pretty small and pretty, so we're afraid to connect on these things. So that's what we're trying to do.
Can I give a better answer to that question,
Of course,
Charlie?
please,
Because you're being a bit humble here. So what I think is incredible about the work you're doing is that you are using your skill set, your talent, your knowledge, for example, about how to organize things, right? How to build a movement or how to bring people together, and then doing it in these refugee camps, for example, the whole camp to campus model. I think it's really, really incredible, the work you've done with movement on the ground, right? Very often refugees get treated as if they're, not really full, well-rounded human beings. They're treated as mainly victims. And what you guys have been doing is basically saying, hey, you can participate, right? Do you want to help? And you were telling me about people who even, could legally move to Germany to live there, and we're like, no, I want to go back to the refugee camp because, that was like my community. That's the place where I want to be. And so I think that's really an example of using what you have, your skill set, your experience, to do something that no one else could have done. So, I mean, that's I think that really deserves a round of applause, and I would love to see more of that. Yeah.
Sure.
Say last question. This is from Instagram. How do you raise more action? Is it very persuasive to enforce disclosure of certain social impact indicators? Are we forcing companies to?
Yeah.
A good question. I mean, it's interesting. The sort of finance minister is an interesting, but because you were talking, about aid. I feel, and I'm interested. I'm sitting next to a historian, so I've got to be careful. But if you think about, in the olden days, labor was so cheap that they could build a whole city. The sort of the government could just, and they had, of course, slavery, which was also cheaper. So, but they could build real infrastructure projects. And as, of course, time has gone on, the spending power impact of a government has become less and less and less. So for me, I look to businesses, and we take it pretty seriously here in the Social Hub, the role of a business and the impact that businesses can play on the local community and the national and the global community. And I really believe that it is time for businesses to stand up. And maybe to your question as finance minister, I'd give us some tax breaks or incentives or something to sort of encourage us to do this, because there is a business case for it. And I think that's why we wanted to be a B Corp, because it's the only label that's actually focused on the consumer. The E-labels that we get for building buildings, I mean, nobody's here because we're a BREEAM that's an awful label to be had. So how do you encourage businesses to be more, a benefit corporation, to be more good in society and take that role and responsibility without just wanting to be good? I struggle, I'm struggling to prove to my investors that giving 1% away by investing in the B Corp, by investing in our social, is delivering value add. And I have to do that, because if I don't, they'll say, well, fuck it, let's stop it. So I don't know how we raise businesses to become more.
You know what? I think the framework that is currently limiting us is that we're mainly asking businesses to do less damage, right? So we have all these indicators saying, like, use less plastic, fewer CO2 emissions, you name it. I'm not against that, but is that really going to save the world? What I really like about you guys, that you say, like, we're committing a certain percentage of our revenue, and revenue is actually much more of profits, like it would be a higher percentage if it was of profits, right? To, charities that we believe in. If I think about why some of the biggest global problems are currently not getting solved, the answer is pretty simple. There's no business model, right? You can't make a lot of money solving malaria. You can't make a lot of money, abolishing factory farming. So here, it's not just businesses that we need, but it's also businesses that, and also owners, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, who use part of what they have to finance those nonprofits. So that's what I really like. Don't just focus on doing less damage, but also use your power to do a lot of good, right?
Yeah, nice final words? Is that it? Yep. Then I ask you kindly to join me, ladies and gentlemen, in thanking Rutger Bregman for being here and talking to us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Rutger is going to be outside doing some book signings, so please come on outside, have a drink, and come and say hello. Thank you. Thanks.